Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops.
And Omari Sacco for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. Make sure you are listening to Wes and Blake Silverman on the Pin Down over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel. I saw that they recently had Stephen Gillespie, who is an incredible draft analyst from No Ceilings. So if you liked what we brought here at the Pistons Pulse in terms of draft coverage with a couple of the other great content creators at No Ceilings, Stephen does an incredible job as well. And they had him on over there on the Pin Down. And then make sure you're listening to all of the other Pistons podcasts out there. Order of the Blazing Horse and Locked On Pistons, Pistons Talk, all of the ones I'm not remembering right now. Incredible stuff out there for all Pistons fans. And it's a great time of the year to take in all of those different perspectives and all of that, because there are a lot of things going on right now for the Detroit Pistons, at least conversations, right, O2? We're not going to get into what we think is going to happen or predicting or whatever, but there has been enough conversation that we felt like it was at least worth talking about. What do we think Tyler Herro could bring this team? What would it mean if this team traded Isaiah Stewart and or Ron Holland? And so we thought it was important to talk about a few of those things and then maybe finish off with a little bit more draft conversation before we get out of here as well.
Yeah, it was worth touching on just with everything that's been going on. I know you guys have seen the Herro rumors, which have been going on for about a week or so. I wrote about it this weekend. Some of the guys who have been discussed in that, including Isaiah Stewart, Ron Holland, Duncan Robinson. And yeah, I know people are going to ask, is this going to happen, this and that? Truthfully, I don't know. Boston, it's kind of been in this mix. And, there's reports from Shams this morning that, and also from Windhorse that, they're prepared to part with Jaylen Brown, which obviously changes the calculus on Milwaukee's in. And we'll just have to wait and see. I don't know. If this still gets across the finish line for the Pistons or if it includes them in the end. But I think regardless, they're going to continue to be in these conversations for other players if, they don't get Herro. And I still think to get any player of that caliber, you're, parting ways with at least one of Isaiah Stewart, Ron Holland, or Duncan Robinson, each, which I think has various negatives from not having him on the roster next season. So yeah, we'll go through all that. And then obviously the first round is tomorrow. So, feel free to sneak in any draft questions you have as well. Because, I think Bryce would be a little disappointed if we didn't talk any draft the day before the draft.
I'll be honest, O2, I'm over it at this point. I'm going to record with good friend Andrew Claudio over on his Knicks Film School podcast right after this. And, of course, I'm going to be excited to do that. I did Lakers Nation yesterday with Trevor Lane. But I'm just ready for the draft to be here. I am to the point where all of the, what do you think about this player versus that player? What's their range? All of that. I am just ready to say, okay, the Pistons drafted whoever at 21. The Knicks drafted whoever at 24. This is what I think about it. You know what I mean? So, but yes, I would say this. If you have draft questions about specific players, throw those in the chat. Wes, if we could star those and then we'll come to those at the end. I think that's probably a better way of doing it since we had the big 1 hour, 10-minute episode last week. Let's just talk about things that any of you are definitely interested in. I kind of want to just dive into the Tyler Herro conversation though here. Like what he is as a player and what do we think he could bring this Detroit Pistons team and what is the fit there? Yeah,
I mean, I think if you're just drawing up a player who addresses the Pistons' biggest weaknesses, like Tyler Herro is, I don't know if I want to say toward the top of that list, just because there are guys who are superstar players, but he would absolutely lift this Pistons offense. He's an elite shooter. He's a capable playmaker. I think I saw someone on social media mention like you get Duncan shooting, but also some of the playmaking versatility you get from Karras. And he's a different player from those guys, but I agree that he does check those boxes. And he's a guy that I would call a Pistons killer as well. I think he had 34 against them the last time. Yeah, his first game against the Pistons, I remember he had 34. I know he scored 40 against them a couple of years ago. He missed a lot of time last season, but it just seems like every time he plays the Pistons, he really, really brings it. So, I believe he's a guy that Pistons fans are pretty familiar with as well for that reason.
I missed a little bit of that, so I apologize if I repeat anything. The dog is by herself right now, and she does not like being by herself, especially I assume she can hear me in here. Hopefully that will all work out okay. But I think the biggest thing for me with Herro is, here's what I want to start, because the actual on-court sell is fairly easy to me, Omari. I don't know what it is for other fans. I don't know what it is for you, but just in terms of if you tell me that you can add a guy that has over the last 5 seasons has averaged 21 points on 46, 38, 89, including almost 8 3-point attempts per game, over 5 rebounds, 4.5 assists. Like if you tell me you can add that guy, I'm in. Like, and to your point, I've watched Tyler Herro just go crazy against the Detroit Pistons. I think he has a little bit more off the bounce than what he gets credit for at times. Here's my thing. I just did the math. He played 285 games over the last 5 seasons, which is an average of 57 games. How much of a worry and how much of a calculation is that for you in terms of trading for him in general? And what has to happen with his contract situation as well?
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing is that you have a guy that's had some injury issues. I think he played like somewhere between 30 and 40 games, last season, which obviously is not great. This is a front office that has valued availability. And, with that, he's on an expiring deal for $33 million. So, you acquire him, you either have to commit to an extension immediately or risk losing him. So the injury piece is a really big piece of it. And, I think that's probably the biggest red flag. People could talk about the lack of defense or whatever else. I think the Pistons could survive defensively, just depending on what that deal would end up looking like in the end. But, you can't really overcome a guy, missing 25 to 30% of every season. And then, of course, you have to wonder about the playoff availability as well. So for me personally, that's a significant factor. You have a guy who's been injury prone and then expiring contract. What do you want to give up for something that really could fail for reasons outside of your control, right? If he's healthy, that's great, but I don't think there's a guarantee of that.
And then the other thing is it got brought up in the chat here, the playoff numbers just straight up aren't as impressive as what those regular season numbers are. Like you go back over the last 3 playoff runs, played 4 games in 24-25, did average 18 points, but it was on 42-31 from the field. The year before that, only played 5 games, averaged 17. It was on 39-35. From the field in 3-point. Only played 1 game the year before that. He did have a 15-game stretch in 21-22, but that's probably the least impressive. He also wasn't in the starting lineup for those 15 games. So there are playoff questions in terms of, okay, what does that look like? Where are these numbers going to land? What is the role? All of those type of things. So I think it's fair to have some questions around Tyler Herro between the contract situation, between the injuries, between do you believe that what he shows an ability to do in the regular season is going to translate into the playoffs? And so because of all of that, and I know we're not going to get into this, I do think a lot of it then comes down to what are you giving up to acquire him? And then what is the contract moving forward going to look like? I think that's the big thing. I think for me, that might be just as big as what you give up to acquire him, Omari. So for anybody who doesn't know, most probably do, but he is in the final year of his deal at $33 million in 26-27. He is extension eligible, and then he is a straight up unrestricted free agent after this year. I think there's a world, depending on what you give up, that you can say, hey, this is just a 1-year thing, and then we'll figure it out from there, whatever. But then you can't give up very many assets if you're going to do that, Omari. And then if I'm going to pay him and extend him for another 2 or 3 years, the injury stuff comes back into play, and how much I'm giving up to acquire him comes back into play. So there's a lot of different things here with Tyler Herro in terms of just beyond, hey, 20-point per game guy that's a high volume 3-point shooter.
Yeah, and that's the aspect of it, because it's like, well, what would a worthwhile deal for Miami be? And, I think as much as fans would love to see a Tyler Herro, I think as much as, the Pistons would like to see a player like Herro come in and lift this offense, there is a very real chance that you overpay for something that ends up not being as impactful as you needed it to be. For example, I think if you could trade one of Duncan Robinson, Isaiah Stewart, or Ron Holland, that's one thing, right? If you have to part with 2 of them, that's one thing. And then what if you have to part with all 3? Because if you're the other 2 teams, I think you prefer the Pistons to part with all 3. And I think that calculus becomes a lot tougher on Detroit's end. So, and then of course the first round pick aspect of it too. Pistons have 21 this year. Langdon indicated that he doesn't see them trading out of this draft, but they have other future firsts. So there's a war chest the Pistons are playing with that you don't want to drain, for a player who doesn't put you over the top. So, all that's factoring into this discussion. I think me and Bryce, I think we're completely aligned on it, right? Like Herro would come in, and as far as number twos, like that's a really, really great fit with Cade. It's just all the other stuff that I think gives you a lot of pause if you're trying to do this the right way.
And I think for me, listen, it seems like the chat probably would lean towards not wanting to trade for Tyler Herro, and I get it. All I will say is at some point, I think a move like this has to happen. And maybe Herro isn't the answer, right? Like maybe you make this move and it's for somebody that doesn't have the injury concerns or is better defensively. Or I see some of the other names, maybe somebody that's younger that you're going to bet that in a different context. Like I think Cason Wallace, like if Cason Wallace was in Detroit where he's starting every single game next to Cade Cunningham and had more of an offensive usage and all of that, maybe it would be better. Or maybe he would be able to grow his offensive game. All I'm saying is I would like to see something like this, a move like this made. And I just don't know who the other names are. Like, what are the other options, right? Like if to me, it's okay, you can either make this move for Tyler Herro or you essentially run back the roster. Is everybody going to be happy with that? You know what I mean? Like, is that going to be enough? I think for me, where I ultimately land, O2, is I can probably get behind this if there's no draft capital involved. If it's, and this is where we can transition into the idea of trading Isaiah Stewart, Ron Holland, and just what that means in general, I probably can get a little more behind it. But if it's those players and a future pick or a first round pick in general, I really struggle with that. I think there's paths through this offseason where you keep all of your first round picks. So that's where I'm at a little bit. Where are you at in terms of just, we're not predicting a trade, anything like that, but is there a certain value where you feel a little bit better about it?
Yeah, I think I agree from the standpoint of you really don't want to give up too much draft capital, especially if you're already parting with a Duncan Robinson, who was your best shooter last season, and you trade him. Even if you get Tyler Herro, you're still going to need shooting. That's you're still going to need somebody else to come into that fold. Or Beef Stew. I mean, I don't need to explain Beef Stew, how important he's been to what the Pistons have done over the last 2 years. So, yeah, me personally, I'm probably more either or. You need your draft capital, I think, to fill out the roster if you make that type of move. And after a certain point, it just kind of no longer makes sense, right? If Tyler Herro were slightly less injured over the last few years, and maybe if he had an extra year left on this deal, that's one thing. But you trade for Tyler Herro, you have to extend. You're looking at least a 3-year extension so you get his full bird rights. And he's making $33 million. So where's his next deal start, right? 37? Are you prepared to,
I would not pay him that for what it's worth. Like if that was the number, I would not make this deal unless it was a 1-year rental.
Yeah, and you're looking at paying them probably, if it's a 3-year deal, it might be $110 million. And you still have to pay Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson. And, your core four essentially is locked in there. So you better be pretty sure that this is going to work out, right? So that's why I say I'm curious to see if this deal gets across the finish line, because there's a lot of reporting out there. And yes, the Pistons have had those talks, but I also think Trajan has been pretty transparent about not wanting to overpay. And Herro is perfectly in that zone of you probably have to overpay to get him and hope that it works out.
Yeah. So to me, the thing is, what do you end up having to give up in the trade? And what does a Tyler Herro contract extension look like? I think that's where it's at for me, because he isn't a two-way player and he hasn't been always available. And there is a playoff drop-off thus far in his career. I think he's extremely talented. And I think he would do a lot of good for this offense. Like, I truly believe those things, but it's not the sure thing answer that I think other guys could be. And because of that, then I think you have to be a little bit more careful about what you give up to acquire him and all of that. I do also want to bring this up from Gabe. If we deal Stewart and LeVert, we can make an additional move using Ron and Duncan's salary and still have draft capital. I will say that I went through a little offseason thing, assuming this trade happened, where actually I think it was all of Stu, Ron, and Duncan Robinson getting moved in this bigger Giannis trade, but that nets Tyler Herro. If you then could get LeVert into someone's cap space or trade exception or something like that, Detroit could then actually work as an under the cap team with real flexibility to round out the rotation of the roster. I don't want to go through all of that right now because I don't think that was kind of our intent here. But even trading for, I kind of was like, man, if they trade for Herro, they're probably definitely not going cap space. They actually there's actually a pretty easy way to do it. The other thing is we know that these trades can expand, right, O2? So maybe they end up sending these things out, but they get an interesting player from Miami or an interesting player from the Lakers or from the Bucks or so. You know what I mean? Like there are guys. So okay. We'll move on. Michael asked the question. I get caught up in the chat sometimes trying to answer every single question. Michael said, stipulating that Stewart is moved, because this is the next thing I wanted to get to. Do we agree it's tough to see their roster succeeding without adding another rotation level big? So again, just general conversation here because the Isaiah Stewart stuff has come up. My answer to this is I do agree with this. I am less confident in a Jalen Duren, Paul Reed, Tolu Smith center rotation than I think a lot of other people are. Where are you at on that in just a vacuum that Isaiah Stewart gets traded for whatever the return is, but it's not big man depth? Where are you at on what the center rotation would look like?
Yeah, I think they're in an interesting position, just given that you have a guy in Paul Reed who has exceeded expectations pretty much since he was signed. I thought he was better last year than he was the year before. And he ended up being their best big man in the playoffs. And you can't discount any of that. I don't know if you could play all three of Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, and Paul Reed every night unless, maybe Stu's playing a lot more power forward, which, we'll see how this shakes out, right? But if you trade Stu, you still have Duren and Paul Reed, but you don't have a player that does what Stu does, where Stu, I think, is by far the best rim protector of those three guys. I think he's the most physical. I think he's just, just the way he plays, the tone he sets, I think is really key to what a lot of the Pistons do defensively.
He's easily the second best defender on the team. I don't think it's close.
Yeah, I mean, his switchability, he does so much stuff that you can't just go out and get. You part with Stu, you don't have a roster that, unless Duren makes another big leap next season, which fair, could happen. You are losing that rim protection. And that was such a key reason why they were so good defensively last season, number 2 ranked defense. If you lose Stu, I don't know if you have the number 2 ranked defense without some other moves taking place to replace that. So yeah, you probably can get through the season with a 3-man rotation of Duren, Paul Reed, and then Tolu as that third big, but you're not getting what Stu gave you. So I don't know if you go get another rim protector. I don't know what it looks like at that point, but you really can't discount just how good he's been on that end of the floor for him.
So one thing I've thought about with this is I do wonder if Trajan and the front office have just, and I'm just throwing out an idea here. So I'm interested to get your thoughts. Obviously, Wes in the chat, everybody in the comments, Wes already has said Paul Reed is a great changeup, awesome pitch to have, but to keep teams on their toes, but you don't want to throw a changeup every pitch. So here's my question. Do you think part of this is, hey, we're about to invest a lot in Jalen Duren, right? We don't know what the number's going to be, but whatever it is, $30, $35 million a year, whether people agree with it or not, let's just say that's what it's going to be. Can you afford to then be investing $50 million into the center rotation between, it's really $55 million between Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, and Paul Reed, while you have Cade Cunningham on his max deal, with Asar Thompson coming up on his deal potentially that could kick in as early as next year. We're still talking about this potential number 2 option, whether that's Trey Murphy or Tyler Herro or whoever. I just wonder if the calculation O2 is actually, if we're going to pay Jalen Duren $35 million, then we have to play Jalen Duren 30 plus minutes a night because that's how the roster is going to shake out. And whether we agree or not, you kind of have to quote unquote devalue the backup center position in a way that you can't be. I think Stu's probably the highest paid backup center in the league. I was thinking through that just off the top of my head today. I think Valanciunas with Denver would be close. Wes, Steven Adams with the Houston Rockets would be close. but I couldn't think of very many centers that truly just come off the bench that would make more sense than Isaiah Stewart. So I wonder if this is just kind of how we invest our resources. Hey, we have to have a center rotation that's not this expensive. What are your thoughts on that, O2? Like, this is just a full bet on Jalen Duren, and if we're going to pay him this money, we can't invest into the backup center as much as what we are right now.
Yeah, a lot of, what this summer is just math, right?
Yeah, sure.
I think you combine that, how much can you pay for a center rotation? And the reason why it even works to the extent that it does is because Paul Reed is making $5 million, right? And after next season, if you want to keep Paul Reed, you're going to have to pay Paul Reed, because I'm sure there's going to be some backup center positions or even, some starting spots depending on how he plays next season where, he gets more role and more opportunity. So, yeah, I think that's a very good question. You can't play all three of these guys every night, unless you're committing to Stu being more of a power forward, which, probably could work, but it also means he's taking a lot more threes and he's, not protecting the rim to the same extent just because he's, not defending the opposing center. A lot of it is just, I think, math and just practically what can you do? And I think a reason why Stu has been in these talks is just because practically he's making $15 million, which is a very tradable contract. He has value around the league. And if you're going to pay Duren, whatever to be your starting center, he's playing between 30 and 35 minutes a night. And I just don't know. Paying $15 million for, a backup center who's playing 12, 15 minutes makes sense in the end. So the Pistons are, figuring all of that stuff out. And I really do think their center rotation has been a huge part of their success, but the numbers are the numbers, and they're going to have to figure some stuff out to make it work next season.
Devin, brought up Naz Reid, and I think that's probably a real answer. I count Naz Reid a little bit more as he can play the four more, but I think that's probably fair. Naz Reid's probably the best answer here. Laz brought up Mitchell Robinson as well. And so, just in general, though, I think because of what you're most likely going to pay Jalen Duren, I do wonder if this is part of the equation. I will say Pistons talk. Let me find it. Said, I also think Tolu Smith could fill the Paul Reed role from the past season, being center number 3. I agree with that. My thing here is more, are we 100% positive that Paul Reed for an entire season and through a playoffs against all the different matchups is the guy that you can just fully count on to be the number 2? I'm a little bit less convinced of that. I think I'm in the minority there, which I understand. That is my thing. And so that point though, Omari, and this doesn't necessarily answer it, I do wonder, oh no, they said I still didn't say their name right. I'm way off here. My bad. I'm so sorry. I apologize. Said it 2 different ways, OT, when I still didn't get it correct. But
man, being a teacher, I feel like that's just trying to get names right? How often on the first day is it you got my name wrong?
It's so bad. It's I just open every class period with, I'm sorry. Say, did you go by a nickname? All of that stuff. And I think that's why I'm so sensitive to this. I'm sure some people are like, Bryce, get over it. It's fine. I feel bad getting people's names wrong. I truly do. So I'm sorry, because I know that this person is often in the chat with us and tunes into as many as possible. We probably should get to this, Omari. I don't mean to jump over other things, but from Educated Fool 21, thank you so much for this super chat. Truly, 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 thank you. We appreciate this a lot. They say, by far my favorite Pistons podcast. Keep up the great work. Do you think the Kings would give assets to take on Levine? If so, could he be a better alternative to Herro? So I think I would have to really do the math on this because his contract is so big. I think he makes $17 million more than Tyler Herro. So this is an interesting idea, but I think the issue with this one is how you actually get the money going back the other way, how you actually execute this without giving up assets. I think the idea here of, hey, we'll just take on Levine's bad money for a year, and that can kind of be a stopgap or a transition to 26, 27, 28 is a really good idea. I think the hard part executing it is you would almost have to attach players you actually like to do it. And it makes it difficult because Levine, I think, is at almost $50 million.
Yeah, he's at about $49 million next season expiring. So again, you get into the math. The Pistons have, essentially 4 guys, Levert, Stu, Robinson, and Holland, who are in that salary range where you might have to give up 3 of those guys just to get to a number where you could actually even legally trade for Levine, right? So even if you get some sort of asset in return for taking on that contract, And if you're the Kings, it's probably just worth writing next season out and letting them expire then, or seeing if you can flip something at the trade deadline if he's having a good season rather than giving up assets now, is my belief, as to what makes more sense for them. But yeah, even if you're getting some asset in return, are you prepared to part with so many rotation guys just because mathematically you don't have a choice but to do it? I think that's the issue with Levine. It's just the fact, if you're making $30 million, that's one thing, but at almost 50, yeah, you're giving up several players to make that happen, and those are key guys.
I think the more interesting name there, if people think he has one more year left in him, is actually DeMar DeRozan. That's the one where it's manageable to bring him in. I think Sacramento, Sam and I did this on the Sacramento's offseason preview in terms of, I think they would be motivated to move off DeRozan because of where it gets them in terms of, I don't remember if it was tax or apron stuff. I think it was tax. And I think his number is much, much more manageable in terms of that. The thing there is then though, do you think that DeRozan, does he even have a year left of six man in him? You know what I mean? Can he be the six man off the bench and bring that scoring? So, I mean, this is why it's hard, because we're bringing up names and it seems like names that either, are really hard to actually acquire, or names that people don't really like in terms of, are they going to bring what you want? But there is optionality. I think that is the one nice thing. Somebody asked earlier, I saw is Trajan already messing up the offseason? And my response would be he hasn't even done the offseason yet, right?
Offseason hasn't started.
Let's be patient here. I think we had the question earlier, if the Celtics end up winning out on Giannis, does that put the Tyler Herro thing to rest? I think it makes it more difficult, because I think with Giannis's contract involved, how you move money around becomes easier. Kyle Metz may tell me I'm wrong there, but I think it then depends on where Miami pivots to. Is their plan B John Morant? Is their plan B somebody else? Is it, do they decide, I saw Laz bring up earlier, not playing Herro and Norm Powell together? Maybe they decide they just have to, So I don't think it's completely off the table, but it does seem like it's picked up steam as part of the Giannis trade, as is the Stewart to the Lakers thing. That seems like the aspect of this as well. Okay, the next thing I want to, go ahead. Do you have anything left on that or Stewart and the center rotation in general? I feel like we touched on that pretty good.
No, the only thing I was going to add was that I just pulled up the spot rack trade machine just to kind of play around with the Levine trade. And yeah, I think you're probably giving up 3 of those 4 guys. And even then, it's still kind of weird because Sac's a first apron team and they can't take in more money than they send out. And that would be a nasty trade. Long story short, I think any iteration of a Levine trade without a third team involved would be kind of nasty for the Pistons. And not to get nasty, the bad nasty.
All right, we're going to talk Ron Holland. And then, so throw in, my point is, we're about to get to the draft portion of this episode. Guys, if a trade happens, we're going to come back and go live, right? Complete transparency, we were not planning on recording today. And then some of this stuff came out and we felt like it was worthwhile to touch on these different things. What I ask is, any draft questions you have, go ahead and throw those in there. We will answer those at the end. The final aspect of all of this that I want to bring up is, what are your thoughts on just the general idea of trading Ron Holland? Right? Because I think probably the idea there is you're trading Ron Holland, and then instead of that, you don't have to trade a future first round pick or something of that nature. Where are you at just in general? Again, it depends on what you get in return, right? If you're trading Ron Holland for a second star that is guaranteed, I think most people would say yes. But in general, what are your thoughts on Detroit, I guess, apparently considering moving Ron Holland here this offseason?
Yeah, I think Ron's in a tough spot. I think the main reason why you're even talking about trading him is not because him as a player, but because of his contract, because he's making around $9 million next season. And there's just a lot of deals that you probably end up having to include him or, like I said, him or Stu or Robinson, just because mathematically you don't have a choice. So I'll start there. If they trade Ron, I don't think it's because they decided he's not, a player who's going to be good or this and that, but just because mathematically you had to include him to make it work, or, to not give up an extra pick, you had to include him to make it work, or something along those lines. I think from the point of the career he's in, where, last season, I think he was their second best perimeter defender. I think you probably agree with that. Bryce and, between Ron and Asar, you could have a good to great perimeter defender on the floor at all times, which also was key for them. People talk about Ron's shooting, but defensively, he's already a really good player, I think, in year 2. Him going into year 3 his age 21 or 22 season. Like, he could make a leap forward, in the next year or two. If the shooting comes along, you're talking about a very different caliber of player, right? And, between him and Asar, I think we both agree we're a little bit higher on Ron being able to knock down threes. Just being a far more willing shooter, and like the form looks good. It's tough. I think, maybe some fans would point out that Ron didn't play in the playoffs. And I think what we talked about with Duran and Stu earlier, you kind of get into with Asar and Ron as well, where if you're committing to Asar, you need him on the floor as long as possible. And you can't play him and Ron together unless Ron learns how to shoot, which, is still an if at this point. Where does that leave him as a player? I think first, like I said, he's in these talks just because salary-wise, you kind of have to. But long-term, you also do have to decide, okay, can we have an Asar Thompson and a Ron Holland when we know that we have to maximize shooting? And, I don't think you have to solve that next season, right? Like, I think, in the grand scheme, if you're not trading him, you could afford to give him a year 3 and, see if the shot comes along, kind of work this stuff out in real time. And he was Trajan's 5th overall pick, which I think means something, right? That was the guy that they, believe could be a big factor for this franchise moving forward. So it's a tough spot. Player-wise, Ron's not a guy you typically look to trade, but the situation's the situation, and he just checks too many boxes trade-wise for him to not be in these talks.
I think that's where I'm at in general as well. I think I'm probably comfortable having him in a trade if that's what it takes to get the deal done. And, of course, it depends on value, right? Like, you're not just trading him for anyone, but where that jumper didn't develop, I meant to do some research to see like how many players that have shot what Ron has from 3 through their first 2 years of their career. Or maybe you could do like through so many attempts, right? He has 350 3-point attempts now through 2 years and almost 3,000 minutes played. And he's at 25% from 3. It just, I wonder what the history is of a player being able to develop, even 35% from the 3-point line after starting out their career that way. Maybe it's more guys than what I realized. Like, there may be a whole bunch of examples. I don't know, and obviously age is a factor here as well. He's still only 20 years old for a couple more weeks. But I do think that based off what we've seen thus far, I have become more comfortable with them moving on from him if that's what it took. And I like the deal that it was a part of. I wouldn't trade Ron Holland just to trade Ron Holland. But if it was that or a future first or something like that, I think I've come around on like, this makes a little more sense, especially if you were extending Jalen Duran and Asar Thompson, 2 guys that I don't believe are ever going to space the floor and have the gravity out to the 3-point line. And you brought up a good point with the contract as well. We are already these things happen fast with contracts, right? With these draft picks, and we're already getting close to where extension eligible and all of those things are going to become a part of the conversation. I think we're similar on where we're at with Ron Holland and all of this.
Yeah. Unless you have more thoughts on Ron, I think it's worth discussing Duncan here too.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just because, 41% from 3 last season. I mean, after Beasley, he probably had the second best season of franchise history as far as just volume, accuracy, the number he knocked down, and was hugely important for them. I thought he was one of their better players in the playoffs. Even on the defensive end, I thought he really showed that, being 6'7", knowing where to be, making the hustle plays goes a long way. And again, he's a guy that typically you're not looking at trading. He's on a very reasonable contract. Only $2 million of the $16 million is guaranteed. The 3rd year, I believe, is not guaranteed at all. Which I think just creates so many different avenues for you going forward, whether you keep or trade. But you need shooting. That's your best shooter. So I don't think it's hustling it backwards to trade your best shooter for more shooting, but it still leaves a void that has to be filled in some other way. Maybe you go and use your $15 million mid-level exception to go get a guy. I don't know what you do at that point, but Duncan's really, really good for this team. And he was just so important to their offense last season that I'm curious how they would go about replacing that production if they do have to include him in a trade.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point in terms of he was so important for this team. Like, the floor spacing and the shot making was so important for the team. You at least, if you're going to move on from Duncan Robinson for whatever reason, you have to at least replace that, right? At the very least, you have to replace it. And then the question comes to, are you getting better if all you do is replace it, right? Like, what if you don't get more either from that player or by adding another player, right? Like my ideal scenario is them somehow figuring out a way to quote unquote upgrade on Duncan Robinson in the starting lineup with somebody that's a little bit more of a scorer all around. And then you still have Duncan Robinson coming off the bench, right? And you get his floor spacing coming off the bench. I don't know how realistic or possible or manageable that is, but that's my ideal scenario is Trajan's able to do that, right? You get a Tyler Herro type of player to be the starter, and then you just put Duncan Robinson in the second unit with Danis Jenkins, or I guess you could go, Robinson could be the quote unquote 3 or something like that. But because I think you want to upgrade the offense, right? Just simply replacing him doesn't necessarily upgrade the offense. So I think it is an important point to talk about how important he was to their offense, their floor spacing and the 3-point shooting. And that's with a team that I think we would both agree needs more floor spacing and 3-point shooting. So I don't think just trading him out or waiving and stretching him or whatever, you can save cap space. You really can. Like if you waive and stretch Duncan Robinson, you can essentially get it down to $666,000 over the next 5 years, which ultimately where none of us are going to really be thinking about, right? But now you have to get back his 3-point shooting and floor spacing and ideally add a little bit more. So I think it's important. I'm glad you brought up just kind of discussing his role in all of this stuff as well.
For sure. More broadly, I do want to touch on this point because it does fall into the Pistons need to make a move now or later type deal. We're talking about they probably have to trade Stu or Holland or Robinson, and you're losing something with all of those guys. Let's say they wait till the deadline, right? You keep those guys going into the season. You have the $15 million MLE, so you add somebody with that. They have Kevin Huerter's bird rights, so you could bring him back, right? A guy who has shown that he could, shoot in the past. That hasn't really been the case the last couple of years. But a bigger part of team building broadly is just having tradable salary. And I don't know if they end up going this route, but they could pursue the avenue of we sign a guy to the MLE, we bring back Kevin Huerter, and then we go into the deadline with avenues to not trade Isaiah Stewart or Duncan Robinson because you have other guys in that salary range that you could work with. As we go through this pod, that's what kind of comes to my mind, right? If you really don't want to trade these guys because they're too important, you don't want to give up too much draft capital, at what point do you say, let's just look toward the trade deadline? Theoretically, Zach LaVine could be in the midst of a good season, healthy, expiring. Now you trade MLE guy, Huerter, whoever else. You've just got far more maneuverability. I saw some people in the comments saying, we went from Herro to Isaiah Joe or, whatever that may be. I don't think that's a horrific outcome for this team because you're adding more players that you can eventually include in that type of deal. So I just wanted to bring that up is that as we kind of look at their playing board this summer, do they go that route? I don't know, but I think that there is some logic in that pathway as well.
All right, let's end with some draft stuff here. This is from Ryan. Should we expect to keep pick 21 in any sort of Herro or other big swing type of trade? I mean, I wouldn't want to give it up in the Herro trade. I guess it depends on what players were actually involved. I mean, somebody might argue I'd rather give up 21 than Ron or 21 than Stu. I think that's all part of the equation. I wouldn't get into where I'm moving all of those different players and names. Obviously, Stu and Ron, there's the cap hit aspect of it that the 21st pick doesn't have as much. And then I'm only moving it if they're going to take a big swing. You know what I mean? They're really going for it for the Trey Murphy or whatever, then I think we would probably see it. But if they're not making that level of move, then I'm hoping that they keep on a hold of 21 and all other future first, that the only draft capital that would be moved this summer is second round picks.
Yeah. And the other aspect of that too is that it's not just a pretty solid first round pick in 21 relative to the season you had, to win 60 games and after the 21st pick. I think it's pretty good. It's in a deep draft, and you could get a guy at 21 that would have potentially been a top 5 or 6 guy 2 years ago. Now, granted, the 2024 draft wasn't that strong of a draft, but this is the type of draft where it's good to be in that position. I don't know if 2027, probably a weaker draft, and you probably end up picking lower than 21. So I think that inflates the value of this pick, maybe not across the league, but at least to the Pistons as an organization. Because you're looking at that pick as one of your last opportunities to add a rookie contract and potentially a player who can contribute, that's under team control. And then, Of course, you control their rights to restricted free agency or extend and all that. This is an important pick for him. It really is. And I think part of the reason why Trajan went ahead and said, I don't see us trading out is because they understand that this could be their best draft pick for a long time if things go the way that they want them to go.
So I'm a bit behind. So sorry if this has been answers, but who would you be interested in if they traded for a second round pick in this class? This person brings up Alex Caravan, Onyenso, and Trevon Brazil. Ugana Oyenso, excuse me. I'm sure I'm not saying that correct. I apologize. Yeah, I think it. So here's what I would say. If I'm going to trade into the second round, I want to get into the top 35. I would want to be able to go get, if I'm going to do it, that would be where I would want to get to. And it would be the guys I have in that range. I think Richie Saunders would be a great name here. I think Caravan is a good name. Emmanuel Sharp is a name that I would like. Listen, I assume Malik Thomas ends up a first round pick or else he wouldn't have stayed in the draft. But somebody of Malik Thomas or Isaiah Evans or Zubi Ejiofor or Henri Vesar or Sergio De La Ria or Joshua, I know people are going to think I'm crazy here. Somebody in those names is going to drop to 31. Somebody has to whenever you talk about the names and they're only being 31st round picks. So if somehow for whatever reason you could get up to 31 or 32, 33, I do think, to the question's point, I do think that there are going to be some names in the first 5 or so picks of the second round that would be interesting to me for the Pistons.
Yeah, they have 14 or 15 tradable second round picks. You could call a team, and if there's a guy that you really like, Alex Caravan, he brings a lot of wing tools. I think he was in the mix for last year's draft too, so he's a guy I've actually, done a fair amount of research on. Yeah, but for a guy like that, you could call the team and say, hey, we'll give you 4 second round picks for 33 or 34. And personally, I would be comfortable doing that if it's a guy you really believe in. I don't know if they end up doing that, but they have 15 second round picks. So if they want to make that happen, I think they have avenues to make that happen.
I don't know what second round picks are valued at anymore because the second round actually got changed as well with the new lottery system.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I actually forgot about that. Yeah.
I don't know if people realize that, but I don't want to get into it right now. But the second round is vastly, vastly different here moving forward in terms of the order. But last year we saw, I believe it was the Suns gave up 4 second round picks to get to number 31 to draft Rasheer Fleming. And with the draft being 2 days now, there is more time for those type of deals to happen. So listen, I don't know if Detroit does it or not, but there are some names that would be interesting. Let's finish with this one to make Wes happy. What do you think of Joshua Jefferson as the pick at 21? If we moved Holland for someone who can shoot, I would really like it, I think. Wes and I had this conversation the other day. I talked to somebody else about it, actually from a different fan base. I would not be as over the moon about it as maybe others are. I think it's a perfectly reasonable pick at 21. I think Joshua Jefferson is a very good basketball player. He really can pass. He can do some things off the bounce. I think he has good size and physicality. I think he's going to be a quality defender. I don't think he's going to be a great defender. He does lack some athleticism and some of those things. For me, while I'm not just yep, home run, I'm not as sold that the jumper is going to be there. And if the jumper's not there, it's okay, this is probably fine. Here's the thing. If the jumper's there, he might be your answer at the 4 position moving forward. And so I think at 21, this would be a great pick. I will say, I think it would be a good pick. And I think for some people, it might be a great pick. And I do think Joshua Jefferson is probably there at 21. I think this is right at the start of his range. So this is a great name to talk about for the Pistons when we've talked about a lot of other players and haven't talked about Jefferson as much.
Yeah. When we talked to Trajan last week, he mentioned just the difficulty of finding good shooting at 21. And, there's probably a likelihood that you take someone there who has the tools to shoot, and then you just work with Fred Vinson to get to that point. Joshua Jefferson fits that archetype because he essentially does everything at a fairly high level except shoot the ball. He was around 34, 35% last season on not very high volume, and that was his best season. So that's the biggest question mark with him. But if he had a more workable jumper, I don't think there's a chance he'd be there at 21 just because of how well he processes the game, his physical tools. He checks a lot of boxes for you. So I think he makes sense at 21. And if you give up on the idea of just taking a shooter and taking the best player available, which is what they want to do, he's absolutely somebody that could fit that best player available argument.
I will just quickly mention this. Laz says Swain from Texas is another just a jumper away guy I like.
I'm also a fan of Swain.
I couldn't agree more. Listen, I think Swain at 21 is a home run because I just have him higher than that on my board. But it is another guy that the role he's going to be asked to play in, if the jumper's not there, I think he might have less volume. I think his free throw percentage is better than Jefferson, and he's a year younger. But here's what you're going to end up doing. You're either going to take one of those guys. This is what Trajan's going to end up doing. We're not doing anything. You're either going to end up taking one of those guys, or you're going to take a guy like Isaiah Evans, where, yeah, he can really shoot it, but then the questions are going to be, can he hold up physically at the cutoff point? What's the defense going to be? Can he provide anything off the bounce? Those type of things. Like, at the end of the day, you are at number 21. So Fly Monk 321, is Evans at 21 a reach? For me, no. This is the tier I would have him in, starting right about that range. My guess is tomorrow night during the draft, there will be players on my board that I would take before him, but I'm not going to be upset if that's what Trajan decides to do. I think Isaiah Evans at 21 is perfectly reasonable of a pick, but it's not going to be without questions. They're just different questions than Joshua Jefferson has, or Dalen Swain, or Karim Lopez, or, whatever player. So the cool thing is this happens in not even 36 hours, 30 hours from now. We're going to start getting some of these answers, and then we will be back on Wednesday, I think most likely, at least for a short episode, to talk about what happened on Tuesday night. Listen, guys, if a Giannis trade goes down and the Pistons are involved and all of that, we are ready to go. Like we've discussed, we're going to jump on here and record as soon as we can if anything crazy happens. But obviously we have the draft tomorrow night, and then we'll be ready to record sometime on Wednesday. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for all of the engagement in general in the chat. I feel like the chat was really, really going today. And again, I feel like you guys are the best because everything stays pretty reasonable. Nobody gets too upset, starts yelling at each other, anything like that. And so thank you guys so much for all of that. Yeah, we'll be back probably Wednesday, maybe sooner. We'll see. O2, take it away, my guy.
Yeah, Bryce said we'll be back pretty soon this week. I mean, this is the fun part of the off season, right? Draft, free agency, trade talks, everything's happening. Summer League. Me and Bryce will both be out in Summer League in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that. We'll do our usual annual Record in Omari's Hotel pod. It's just going to be a fun week, so really appreciate you all for joining us on your lunch breaks or wherever you are. Great engagement today. So that just shows how much hype there is around the team. So again, thank you, and I'll close us out. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and big shout out to Wes Davenport, and we'll talk to you all soon.